Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rochelle Muriel. I'm the director of the intervention department. For those of you who are not familiar with the intervention department, it includes our family resource centers, children in transition, chronic absenteeism, truancy, and re-engagement work. And I'm going to turn it over to Tristan to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Tristan McElhaney. I'm the principal over at Washoe Inspire.
Hello, I'm Jake Chapin. I'm the principal at Knatchez Elementary School.
So we are super excited to have you all here. I can't see you quite all of you. So feel free to write in the chat or speak up if you have questions so that we can answer them as we go along. We have a couple of objectives that we would like to accomplish today with all of you. And so what we are really hoping to do is gain an understanding of trauma and how it impacts attendance. Attendance is often something that we see fairly early on, and it's really an indicator to help us understand that something might be happening with a student. And so it's a really important data point for us to be tracking and looking at, especially if you see drastic changes in attendance with students. So we'll go over that a little bit more as we move through this presentation. We want to understand how trauma impacts the whole child. What does it look like? What are some of the behaviors that you might see in your classroom? And then we're going to talk about strategies to create trauma-sensitive environments that foster relationships and engagement. So I'm really excited to have Tristan and Jake here because they can give you a perspective from a principal from elementary and high school to tell you some of the things that they do. It looks different when you're developing relationships with young children and their families compared to high school students and their families. So we're going to talk about how that might look a little bit different as we move along. And then I'm going to turn this over to Tristan.
All right, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. Just a quick reminder about the work that we're talking about in terms of dealing with students with trauma and in the school. It's very difficult. It is time consuming. And as we learn more about trauma, it's important for us to update our practices to match what students need. So now if you guys can just take a second and in the chat, go ahead and put in some reasons off the top of your head as to why you think students are missing school. On the heels of that, we're going to take a look at a video from a student named Maria that I've been working with over at Inspire. And it's important to recognize that the only reason that she was ever willing to sit down and have this conversation or to try to work on anything with the trauma that she's experienced in her life is because of the efforts that everybody else has put in up to this point and that we're going to continue to do. Just really important to remember that.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share this, and then Tristan and Jake, if you could give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. And see
why don't you just take a second to tell us about what it feels like when schools sort of ignore or don't do a great job of engaging you about traumatic experiences?
I feel like as a student, when you don't feel support from your teachers or administrators or maybe even counselors, it can be pretty hard to make it to school and actually want to be there and want to be motivated to do work. And even just not having anyone or having anyone to feel like you can talk to in the school is there, it makes it a lot harder on more like social anxiety and stuff like that. And it just really, I feel like it drives a lot of students away from school when these things such as trauma aren't treated as highly as academics are.
Okay. On that same thought, when you've experienced trauma, what were the biggest things that made it difficult for you to come to school based on responses from people at the school, from students up through administrators?
From students, it can be just little remarks people say, and from teachers, it's just them not recognizing the things that are going on, or or when they just, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but
would you say, so let's quantify it a little bit. When you're saying the teachers maybe don't understand it, are they, when you walk in, we've talked about these different things, Did you always feel safe in every classroom?
Not every classroom that I've been in, I haven't felt safe.
Did you feel like teachers took enough time to get to know you so you feel like they're a trusted person to talk about things with?
Some teachers are better than others, but not every teacher is very mindful.
Okay. And are they helping you talk about different choices you could make, or giving you the option, the ability to make different choices?
Yeah, the teachers who usually are more helpful with things, they usually help me, like, such as, like, they gave me like a safe environment to be in, and then they like make it so I can trust them. And they give me like collaboration ideas on what we can do to fix the problem when there is a problem, and like they gave me like a feeling of empowerment to make sure I can do it.
Okay, great. So now I want to get into a specific situation. So I've known you because you've been at my school multiple times, and we built rapport. So we have a level of trust. So you were just recently at our school, and there was an incident when you were being escorted to the restroom. Tell us about that.
The teacher was standing in the doorway, and I don't know why she was standing in the doorway, because I've never usually watched like this unless like I'm in jail or something like that, And I'm not like a safety risk at the school, and I'm not like I'm gonna go do drugs in the bathroom or something, and it's not like I have special needs and need to have somebody with me. So the fact that she was there, it just made me really uncomfortable. So I kind of had like a little freak out, and I told her like, "Girl, get the F out!" Like, and you, Mr. Mack, you helped me like calm down, and like you told me like you gave me like choices of what I could do, and like you encouraged me to do like the normal thing and like talk and be reasonable and like take a minute to think about what like I was doing and what I was saying and stuff.
And do you feel that approach helps you figure out how to manage future events?
Yes, because your approach versus other teachers, no offense to them, but like in most schools, after I go and I freak out like that, I'm most likely gonna get suspended because a teacher's just not gonna like my attitude, and they're just gonna like shoot back at me. But in reality, like a lot of kids just can't control what comes out, Like, and I feel like teachers need to understand that kids are developing, they're growing up, and some of us are just getting, our mental illnesses and things like that. And, some of us are just screw looses and, we need some tightening. But I feel like when teachers want to like keep unscrewing that loose, it doesn't really help. Rather than if they were to take a minute and think, all right, why are they acting like this? What's going on? Like, what can we do to fix this? Instead of teachers just, no, don't do this, act right, or you're going to go home. All right, I'll go home. And next thing you know, you get a suspension, like, and in other schools, I feel like, or we just try to infiltrate like these like positive things that we can do to help students who are going through it at home and other places. Like, if we could just do this, I feel like it would definitely have an effect on students actually wanting to come to school. Versus some of them just want to, escape all day. None of them want to go home, and none of them want to go to school. And so when school isn't good and home isn't good either, and school can't do anything, kids end up spiraling, and most kids end up dead or in jail. By this year, we've already had like a couple of deaths. Some of them have been overdoses. Some kids are just getting shot in the streets. If we could just, maybe if teachers could just, help want kids to be in school, like be mindful and take a second to think about your reaction to the kid's action, then maybe we could like keep more kids off the streets and in homes and doing well in school. Because all these kids, everybody wants to be smart and go to college, but none of these kids think they can do it because they just don't think they can do school, because most of them are just too caught up with themselves and in their own head. When they go down and do school, they just can't do it. They get frustrated and they get mad and they just can't do their school. Maybe if teachers, like I was saying, like we've all been saying, like they do those things to help, like if they do those things to help, like students might actually start, clearing out, feeling a little more like at peace with themselves, and they'll actually want to like start doing work, because I know since some of those things have been happening for me, like at Reno High, we've had a awareness week, a self-awareness week, and there was other activities that I didn't even know about or participated in that were like, they did like face mask and little cross bubble things, and I wasn't even a part of that, but just the teachers in the classes telling us that they wanted, like they cared about us and they wanted us to do good, and that they were going around to each of us trying to, talk to us about ourselves and things like that. I feel like it definitely did a difference for my week. I definitely did a lot more work than I expected, and I feel like I've been doing a lot better in classes and other things.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
And we're going to take a second now to sort of debrief and have a conversation.
I would like to ask that at least 3 or 4 of us share out about what were some of your takeaways from what Maria had to say. So I'll ask for volunteers first, and then we'll go from there.
I'll
I can
start.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay. So one of the things that we talked about, one of the last things that was really mentioned in our group, was it was a lot about what she was talking about with like the relationship, and like the key point that stuck out to me that I mentioned to my group was that she really said that her opinion about a teacher is how they if they think about the reaction before they act, because the acting first can really set or like make or break her opinion on the teacher and how she feels safe with that teacher.
Yeah, really good point. Yes. Thank you very much, Lindsay. And Claudia, I saw you wanted to say something.
Yeah, we just kind of acknowledged like the same thing that what Lindsay just said. She was, Maria was pretty articulate in acknowledging that, that she knows that she has these challenges, but she doesn't feel like teachers are really taking the steps that they need to understand her, to help her push through it. They just are kind of dismissive, and she's willing to accept being dismissed. Okay, I'll go home, rather than somebody just really leaning in and working with her on where she's at.
Right. Thank you, Claudia. Anyone else like to share with us?
I can share. There's a group of us in room 2, and we were impressed with her self-awareness. And then we were also impressed that with Tristan connecting with her and giving her the choices, it empowered her to where she kind of felt that inner peace. So just really showed that connection with people, the importance of choices, and just talking to her with a logical conversation versus like the dismissing. Pretty much kind of what Lindsay and Claudia already said.
Perfect. Thank you, Sue. And one more, see if anyone else wants to share.
I'll build on what she just said. We talked about how little control some of these students have in their own lives and what happens to them, and that opportunity of choice, you could hear in her that she wanted to do better, that she wanted to learn, and being given that choice, and she used the word empowerment a lot, gives her a sense of control over some part of her life, which I think was really powerful.
Oh, thank you, Kimberly. Appreciate that. Tristan, did you have any final thoughts before we move on?
Well, just in our group, I've said it in the other session, so I'm going to say it here. It took a long time to build that rapport. And it went from the first meeting of Maria, where she yelled at me in my office for 40 minutes and gave me my best professional insult ever, telling me that I have a hairline that looks like Pennywise the Clown. So it went from experience from there. It took months to get to the point where she was actually ready to engage me in conversations like this.
That's awesome. And I saw many of you laugh and smile at that. So yes. All right. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. We really appreciate your comments. Turn it over to Jake.
All right, so this information comes to us from the Institute of Education Sciences and the U.S. Department of Education. This comes from meta research, which I had to look up, but what that means is they take a bunch of national and international studies and they put it together and they look for common themes. And so these themes or factors that are related to absenteeism come from this meta research from that group. So they talk about community specific is one of the themes, unsafe neighborhoods, lack of healthcare, education support services, job opportunities. There are student specific factors that are related to absenteeism. Negative peer influence, bullying, academic struggle, teenage parenthood. Kind of really interesting in this research study is that bullying only shows up in predominantly the United States field of research. Bullying doesn't show up as a reason for absenteeism a lot outside of the United States. School-specific reasons, teacher effectiveness, less challenging classes to take, poor student-teacher interactions is really what we've been talking about this whole time. Family-specific reasons, and I saw all these pop up in the chat. At-home responsibility, low parent involvement, unstable housing, sometimes some language barriers. And it's also important to note as we go through tonight and think about that all of these things like can coexist. So sometimes something from community specific also bleeds into what's going on in the family, the school, and the student. So there can be multiple reasons. They can be layered within each other, or it could just be one of these single reasons. But these are kind of the predominant 4 themes in the outstanding research about absenteeism.
All right, so now as we head into our case studies, just sort of wanted to give a refresher on how we respond to trauma. And this is sort of the framework that I've used that works really well for me. It's not mine. It's been cobbled together from a bunch of other places, but it's what I use. And the first thing I always have to do is remove judgment. How the student got there really isn't that important. Here's where they are. And so now we have to work with them to figure out what's next. And that requires building trust through honest conversation and building rapport. And it does take a long time, but it can be accomplished. We've got to make sure they're safe. We got to ask them if they feel safe on campus and off campus, and see what kind of resources we can provide if they're feeling unsafe. And choice is huge, but the choices don't have to be gigantic things. It can be what room we're going to talk in, who's going to be in the meeting, what we're going to discuss. It can be very small things, but as long as it's a choice that a student gets to make, it's going to help them engage in the process. And we need to be collaborative and remember that our timeline or the school's timeline is very secondary to their needs. We have to address what their needs are first and then figure out how we can respond rather than trying to tell them how they're going to fit in our box. And then we also have to empower the students to explore what's going on around them and give them the opportunity to try new skills and know that they're not always going to work the first time, but encourage them to keep going. And then help them stand up for themselves and figure out what they can do to engage on their own terms. So this leads us into our first case study. A middle school girl with extremely good grades and no attendance issues suddenly and without warning stopped coming to school. Teachers reached out to the family with no initial response. Persistent and carrying phone calls finally got through, and we learned that her father had drowned while trying to enter the United States coming from Mexico.
Just like we did with Maria, we're going to share out a couple of groups to see what you came up with in terms of how you would best support this student. So Jenny, if you want to send us to breakout rooms, we'll see you all in 4 minutes. Would anybody be willing to share out some of the things you discussed in your discussion group?
I'll go ahead and share out for group 10. We had a really good conversation around question number 1. Some of the things that we talked about is making sure that we're not being judgmental, but we are there to support them through their grief. We want to try to get to those students early so that that support is provided as soon as possible. We also talked about making sure that we get their basic needs met, and then serve as a means to provide additional resources as needed. Maybe sometimes that's beyond the school, and looking at other agencies that we can connect families with.
Great, thank you, Christy, that's great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody else?
What I took away from our group was that it's gonna take time. Like, these questions were super tough and the situation was super tough. So just being patient and acknowledging that it's going to take a long time for that relationship to be built.
Right, and we had somebody in my group talking about how there was a family that she, and if you want to jump in, go ahead, but talked about how, you know, it was really difficult, and the family was not open and receptive to resources or help. And it took a really long time before she was able to be open with that person and talk to her about what she needed. And then they were finally able to get those resources. But like Tristan talked about at the very beginning, it takes a lot of consistency. It takes a lot of patience and time to build those relationships so that families and students are comfortable with us. So anybody else? Take one more.
We talked a lot about giving the student a safe place at the school, and we also, for them to grieve and not having the teachers force them to, you know, like skip that process or just to focus on academics. And then we also talked about the complications if the family's not there legally, how that could lead to trust issues and them not receiving or being able to receive certain resources. And so how we can support them and build their trust and engage the family in a way that they know that we're there for them.
Thank you, Brooke. Appreciate that. Okay, so it's my turn to talk to you guys a little bit about data, okay? We wanted to share to you to what extent is our students absent, and I'm guessing that all of you could probably tell me anecdotally what's happening in your schools. You are not seeing students as often. They're not logging on if they're distance learning as often. They're not in the classroom as often. And we see that through our data. So this was data pulled by our accountability department, and I'll give you a chance to ask questions when I'm all done too, in case you have any clarification questions. This was pulled on December 19th of December 17th of 2020. The gray bars are 2019, and the blue, I guess this is royal blue, is 2020. And you can see that our chronic absenteeism rates in Washoe County have increased dramatically. Now, that's not unusual for the nation. What is happening nationally is all districts are seeing significant increases in chronic absenteeism. And we are seeing that for a variety of reasons. We're seeing it because folks have lost their jobs. They've become displaced across the nation. They've lost their homes. They have a lack of access to food and basic needs. They have a lack of access to Wi-Fi and internet. If we do have laptops, maybe the Wi-Fi, there's not enough broadband width, I guess is what it's called, to support all those laptops. There's lots and lots of things that are happening. And so those are just a few of the things that I know that we have seen, and schools have talked to me about what they are seeing. And so this is sort of a step, like a staircase, right, of what's happening. So 37% is over 22,000 of our students are chronically absent. And just to remind you, what chronically absent means is they have missed 10% or more of the the days that they were enrolled in school. And so you can see that our high school students are the students that are struggling the most. Over half of them are chronically absent in high school. And if we break that down, the vast majority of those are severely chronically absent, so they've missed 20% or more of the days that they were enrolled. If we want to look at our learning models, this might not be a surprise to you if you're working in some of these grade levels. But it is our hybrid learners that are struggling the most across our district. Those students that are going every other day. So that occurs in middle school and high school. And you can see our middle school students are really struggling with that hybrid learning model. So 46% of them are chronically absent. But in high school, it's our distance learners that are really struggling, with almost 60% of them as chronically absent. And also with elementary school, distance learning has been a struggle as well. So it's interesting to kind of see what that looks like, and to consider developmentally where our middle school students are at, and developmentally where our high school students are at, and how they are doing in these different learning models. If we break it down by race and ethnicity, it is our American Indian, our Hispanic, Latino, Latinx population, African American, and Pacific Islander students that are really struggling, where we are seeing very serious and significant increases in chronic absenteeism. So that is concerning to see that. And then if we break it down by special population, you can see that our children in transition, those are students that are experiencing homelessness, our English learners, and our free and reduced lunch and IEPs, those are our students that are struggling pretty significantly. Also, our students in foster care are struggling pretty significantly with chronic absenteeism. Okay. So any questions about this data before we move on to our next case study? Okay, so our next case study is a pretty significant one. And again, you're going to use the same question. So if you want to use the same question as last time, you can. And I'll remind you what those questions are before we go into our breakout session. But first, I want to share with you the case study. And this is a real case study where it's a second grader student who has stopped attending school. Though her 3 siblings continue to attend each day. The siblings reports are vary. She's either sick, or she's missed the bus, or she has an appointment. So there's varying excuses of what is happening and why she's missing school. The parent's cell phone is inconsistent, so they've really had a hard time getting a hold of the parent through the phone. And the family lives far away from the school, about 15 miles. So the school goes and does a home visit, and what they find out is the parent says that the student has a fever. The student continues to not attend, and there's still no contact from the parents. So the first home visit didn't work. The second home visit reveals that the student has a severe lice infestation, and the parents are really expressing some embarrassment around that. And they're really worried that they might have to shave her head to treat the lice. So the principal, the community, and the schools, and the nurse conduct a home visit. They provide supplies, they assist in washing and combing through the hair, showing the parents how to treat the student, and reviewing home procedures. But as we're welcoming her back and we're considering these questions, what are some of the things we could do to support this student? And so I'm going to pull up this chat again to remind us all about those questions. So our questions in our breakout room is, you could either discuss about how could you build trust and rapport with the student and family? What can be done to ensure that the student feels safe? How might you meet the student where they are at? What choices and resources could you provide? And what steps could be taken to empower the student and family in this case study? So pick one of those questions and discuss, and we will share out again. And I'm going to ask some of the folks that haven't shared to share out this next time. So we'll see you in 4 minutes. Thanks for joining us back again. Let's share out again. And I think Katie volunteered from my group, so I'm going to put her on the spot.
I was voluntold. We just talked about, providing the parents reassurance that, this happens and it's normal, and giving them some strategies to help prevent it in the future. And then connecting the student with, maybe one adult at school that they can kind of, she can check in with, and maybe like a peer buddy, something like that.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. Is there anybody else that would like to share out that hasn't had the opportunity yet, or that has?
I'll share for my group. We were talking about not being judgmental and giving flexibility for the student to get caught up in school, not giving her the flexibility with her grades and with time to complete assignments and support for that. And primarily building those relationships, which take time, but just being there consistently.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. That's great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what does trauma look like. And I see quite a few of you who are already experts on this in our session. And so we're going to talk briefly about what is trauma, what does it look like with students. And this is a complex subject. And so we are only really briefly touching on a lot of what trauma means, but trauma is a subjective thing, right? And so what is traumatic to me might not be traumatic to somebody else. So if we take something like divorce, for some students, that's a very traumatic event. And for others, it's a sad event, but it's not something that is traumatic for them. And so when we look at the kinds of trauma that students experience, there are two main ones that we could look at for the purposes of this presentation. And so there's an acute trauma. So that could be something like the sudden loss of a parent, witnessing some violent act, a car accident, a natural disaster, and you lose your home, something like that, some sort of event that occurs. Then we have chronic trauma, and that's something that could happen ongoing. So it could be sexual or physical abuse. It could be community violence that's ongoing. It could be something like that that's ongoing and chronic in the life of the student, lack of access to basic needs. So they're not getting adequate food in the home, those kinds of things. And how does it impact behavior? So some of the general things that we're seeing could be some of these things that you see up on the slide. And again, we all deal with things differently, right? And we have different levels of resiliency and coping skills that we've developed, and so do our students, depending on their support network, their protective factors, their age, all sorts of things will impact their behavior. So you could see things like impulse control, you could see acting out. So for an elementary school student, that might mean something like they're verbally abusive to the teacher, or they're saying something and using profanity, or they're taking chairs and they're throwing it all over the room. You might see something like that. That doesn't mean that every student that is experiencing trauma will do that, but that's something that some students might do. They might feel on edge, and so their level of calm is much higher, or their level of baseline is much higher level of arousal than maybe what you would see as typical, right? And so things could trigger them that you ordinarily wouldn't think would. So maybe the fire alarm really gets them really worked up. And that could make students nervous, but this particular student is really on edge and reacting to it. You could see moodiness, students who are frustrated. You could see acting out in a high school student too. So leaving the classroom, you can see more chronic absenteeism and truancy behaviors, fighting with the peers, that defiance that you see sometimes with teachers. Those are some things that you could see. But I want to bring your attention to the last one, because this is one that we can often miss. And those are the students that are withdrawn, they're quiet, and they're not engaging in school. So they're not engaging with, they could, and this is, it'll look different with everyone, but they may not engage with their peers. They may not engage with their teachers. And so they're those quiet ones that are really not interacting with their environment. And so be thinking about that when you're observing behavior with students. I want to point out, and many of us already know about the adverse childhood experiences, and if you were able to study, and if you were able to watch the keynote speaker, Ms. Jennings referenced this, right? And this was a study that was done way back. The original one was done in 1995 to 1997, I believe, at Kaiser Permanente. They provided a survey to 17,000 adults, and they surveyed the experiences that those adults had as children, and they were really measuring the numbers of adverse childhood experiences that those adults had. So they looked at things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, suicide of a loved one, those kinds of things, domestic violence. So they looked at all those things, but it didn't cover everything. And so Tish Jennings talked about, it doesn't cover, I believe, the death of a parent. And for her, that was a very traumatic experience, but that wasn't in the survey. But the survey has since been replicated and looked at and studied a multitude of times. So if you're really interested in this study, you can actually Google it. And it comes up right away on the CDC website, and it gives you a lot of information on this study. But what they found and what they wanted to know is, are there long-term effects of adverse experiences from children experiences as children? And they found that yes, indeed, there are long-term impacts. And so they noticed that adults who had more adverse experiences, engaged in more risky health behaviors. They had chronic health conditions like cardiac disease and diabetes more often. There was negative impacts on their mental health. So they had more incidents of attempted suicide. They had higher incidents of anxiety and depression. And so that was something that was striking about this research, just seeing some of these long-term impacts of traumatic experiences in the lives of children. What they also found is 2/3 of those that were surveyed had experienced some sort of childhood trauma. So if you think about 2/3 of your school, that's a lot of your students that could potentially have experienced trauma in their lives. 1 in 5 reported 3 or more ACEs. So the more ACEs or adverse childhood experiences a person had, the more negative their outcomes were as adults. So people who had 4 or more were more likely to be smokers, 12 times more likely to attempt suicide because it had a negative impact on their mental health, 7 times more likely to be alcoholics, and 10 times more likely to use illegal substances. What does that look like academic for our students that we are working with? We could see things like decreased ability to engage. And Tish Jennings talked about this, how she had a hard time just retaining the information because she was still her brain was in that survival mode still, right? And so being able to do those high functioning prefrontal cortex activities of really engaging and learning was difficult for her to do. That difficulty retaining information. We see students who have experienced trauma having higher rates of school absences. They have an increased risk of dropping out and increased behaviors. So some of those behaviors that we talked about, that acting out, results in suspensions, and that means they're missing out in more school because of the behaviors that they're exhibiting as a result of their trauma. So I'm going to turn this over to Tristan because he's going to talk to you a little bit about what are some of the tools available to us when we're thinking about chronic absenteeism and how do we support all students? What can we use to monitor our students and try to find out how we better support them?
I did it again. I was muted. So thanks. We're going to talk about some tools that we can find in BIG. All these really help you look at different pieces of chronic absenteeism. This first one, the Student Accounting Dashboard, gives you, these are all through BIG. And if you want to email me, I love BIG. I love talking about BIG. I know I'm weird, but go ahead and shoot me an email if you want to learn more about these reports. So the Student Dashboard gives you a chance to look at the number of absences students have had in a row. Like the student that we talked about in middle school where they just fell off, this is the report that would catch that. That's sort of acute trauma, something that happened right then and there that had a student just stop coming. The next report this is just the absenteeism dashboard. This one's really cool because on the left it shows you the historic view over the last few years for chronic absenteeism, and on the right it shows you the different percentages of where kids are on that spectrum. But if you click on any one of those colors, it will drill down to a list of students that meet those categories. And the important part about this, as opposed to the last one, is you can still be severely chronically absent, especially in high school, and still attend 1 or 2 periods a day. So this catches those kids that meet categories that just because you don't see them all the time, or you can see them almost every day, but they still count as chronically absent because they don't go to class. And then this one, the ADA tracking dashboard, what this one does is it gives you a chance to cohort your students to look at your interventions that you've put into place. So as you're talking to students and you're identifying different ways to support them, you can put in a date range, which would be whenever you started the intervention, and then you can track through real time to look at the differences in average daily attendance for each student. So you're able to see if what you're doing is actually making a difference in helping a kid get to school more often. And now on to Jake.
All right. So quickly, I'm going to go really fast so we have some time to debrief at the very end about strategies that we all use. But I just want to share a little bit about Knatchez and the things that we do just to get the conversation started when we start talking about strategies that are effective across the district. So quick history on Knatchez. We've got a chronic absenteeism rate of about 23% right now, which we're pretty proud of. When you look at the American Indian rate of 51%, we're a little less than half of that. We're a small elementary school. We've got 120 students only, but our attendance zone is like 20 miles in every direction. So we've got a long ways that we got to draw students from. And I know we all have trauma, but just to kind of lay out the trauma that we're experiencing this year. This year, we've had 4 students lose a parent. 3 of those students, not siblings, not related, have in the same classroom lost a parent. 3 students in the last year have lost an older sibling. We also have a pretty high COVID rate, which has led to the loss of many tribal elders, which are the grandparents of our students. And around 40% of our students have a non-parent guardian. So we've really ended up losing almost 20% of our primary caregivers just in this one school year, which I think is pretty traumatic. So just to kind of lay the groundwork of where we're at. This comes from our 3rd grade teacher. It was in the Reno Gazette Journal in February of this year. And I just want to read it real quick because I think it's really powerful about talking about relationships and the things that we do. So she said, I have come to cherish these relationships with my students' families. I recently received a text as class was beginning. A student had slept in and missed the bus. The parent just wanted me to know. As a result of the relationships we had built during social distancing, the homeschool connections became solid. I was able to quickly contact a school representative available to pick the student up and bring them to school. The parent quickly accepted the assistance. Within 45 minutes, the student was in school. A year ago, this would not have happened. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, I would not have felt comfortable offering the school services, and the parent would not have contacted me, let alone texted me to explain why their child was not in school. Because of the evolution of our relationship, we have been empowered to communicate our needs to one another. And as a side note, this just happened again this morning. Same teacher texted me and said, hey, just missed the bus. Mom says she's ready to go. Is there any way we can get her? And I said, right after morning announcements, we'll go grab her. So I jumped in the little school van and we ran up 15 miles away to Nixon and picked her up. And while I was there, I called our secretary and I said, hey, is anybody else in this neighborhood not at school? And we had one other kid not at school. So I just knocked on her door and I was like, hey, I'm here to pick her up. And mom was like, what? All right. And so when we removed the judgment and we build the trust and relationships, and she just kicked her out the door like 5 minutes later. And so I came rolling into, and they happened to be in the same grade. So I came rolling into class and I said, hey, you sent us away for 1, we brought you 2, perfect attendance in 3rd grade today. So pretty exciting. And that's kind of like when we talk about relationships and going the extra mile, that's kind of things that we try to do. You can skip that one real quick for us. So just to share stuff that works for us. I really believe that we got to create a school experience for students and staff that they don't want to miss. So we start out like with every year with this theme of surprise and delight. What can we do to surprise and delight everybody, right? So from the principal thing, I try to really surprise and delight our staff and give them reasons to be there. So we've had food trucks come out. If there's Indian taco sale, I like to buy Indian tacos and we give the staff Indian tacos. Easter, I hid some eggs around their rooms and let them go on a little Easter egg hunt in the mornings. I wrote them a little thank you card for being so awesome. So Monday donuts, all kinds of fun stuff for staff, because I think if we got happy staff, right, those guys are better prepared to kick out some happy students. Student-wise, we do all kinds of fun stuff and we try and surprise them and not announce them. I like to juggle, so sometimes a juggling show at lunch or some magic. We've got our music teacher is the guy who sings opera at Macaroni Grill. So sometimes we bring that guy out and we make him do a little lunchtime opera show, which is pretty ridiculously awesome. Way better than it probably sounds. At least to me, I was like, this is going to be terrible, but it's not. It's pretty awesome. So we really try and do all kinds of stuff. We read, if we can bring out a book and read it, we do that. If we can, it's getting warm now, we can do some surprise otter pops at the end of the day. Got to eat them all before you get on the bus. Right, kind of thing. So any kind of thing to surprise and delight the students, and that's what they get for showing up each day without knowing it. So we start each day. I like to meet every student at the door or at the gate as they come in. We got the single access point, so I say hi, I try to recognize them all by name. We got this kid whose name's Wolf, which is probably the greatest name of all time, and I howl at him every morning. And he doesn't howl back yet, but it's coming. It's coming for sure. And then we roll right into meeting those kids to the morning announcements. And that's where we build the hype for the day. And so I get on there and I'm loud and crazy and talk about how beautiful it is and what a great day for learning. And it's become such a, I forgot about this yesterday, such a part of the day that even if I'm not here, I have to call in and do it, or we get some student complaints. And so we were actually on vacation and I had to call in from the beach and do my morning announcements, which my wife thought was the lamest thing of all time, but it was pretty awesome. So during those morning announcements, we call out a daily attendance award winner where we thank kids for being at school. And I say it's random, but it's super random in the fact that we try and identify kids coming through the gate that look like they need a little pick-me-up that day. And we thank them for being at school, and we hook them up with a little prize. We have weekly and monthly attendance incentives. So what we're doing right now is we call it April Presents brings May Presents, which is a homophone, I think. If that's not right, don't tell me. I've been telling everybody it's a homophone. But if you're here in April with your presents, you get some presents in May. So we give all the classes that get perfect attendance for the week get a little treat. All the classes that have the best attendance for the month get a little award party. And we utilize peer pressure. So every morning I'm on there and I'm like, call your friends up who are not at school and tell them they got to be here because they're wrecking your prizes. And so we try and mobilize the student peer pressure force to get those guys to school. We try and do lots of cool assemblies, and we don't like to announce those either. So when students are here, they like, oh, the assembly. And one of the cool things we did where we combined some surprise and delight in assemblies is we had that yo-yo assembly, which I know we've all seen. But beforehand, we got yo-yos donated for every student. So right after the assembly, we gave them all their yo-yo and hey, surprise for being here. And only the students that show up, minus the excused absences, we still gave those guys a yo-yo because I'm a sap. But if they were there, they got rewarded for showing up and getting a little surprise and delight. And then the last thing I want to touch on before we go is just the mental health aspect of things. So we really encourage everybody to make sure we take care of themselves, right? We got to be healthy humans so that we can teach healthy humans and hit the student side of things. And then we can, if we're healthy, we can work on the mental health of our kids. And the other thing, and this is just my own personal thing, and anytime I get to stick a bullet on something and talk about it, I like to do it, is we really think about what atmosphere are we asking kids to come back to? So if they've just missed 10 days and they come in and we're like, hey, you're failing everything. Here's your stack of 3,000 worksheets. They're probably not going to be like, oh, hey, this is a super fun place. Can't wait to come back tomorrow, right? So we got to be really intentional about the kind of atmosphere that we bring our students back into when we bring them in. So I think that covers kind of some of the fun stuff that we do. From here, we're going to roll into some groups, and I'll let Rochelle talk about that real quick.
Okay, this is our final activity, everyone. We're going to do one more breakout session. And what we would like to do is have you come up with a list of some of the strategies that you currently use to address these areas: creating trauma-sensitive environments, fostering relationships, and addressing chronic absenteeism. What we're going to do with that is when we come back, we're going to ask for you to write those things in our chat. We're also going to have a little bit of time, not a whole lot actually. We're kind of running out. So 3 minutes, Jenny, in this we have just very little time, but we want you to write in the chat some of the things, and then we're going to compile this list from all 4 sessions and send them out to you so you have some real strategies of what your colleagues are doing to address these areas. So we'll see you back in 3 minutes. Oh, that was quick. That was really fast. So please open your chat and write a couple of your ideas, because we had some great ones talking about mindfulness, loving some of the stuff that Jake is doing, calling parents, building relationships, communication is what we talked about in our group. So please open up your chat, fill it up with as many ideas as you have when you are trying to either develop a trauma-sensitive classroom or environment, fostering relationships, or addressing chronic absenteeism. We're super excited to give you a big long list of strategies that you might be able to use with your school. And with that, we will put up our contact information. Oh, do you want to finish it up really quick, Tristan, as a reminder?
Just to reground us in the work that we're doing, this is just want to come back to this slide and just remind people that the important work is done by removing judgment, building trust, making sure students feel safe, that we're providing choices, being collaborative, and ensuring that the student has a way to feel empowered about the decisions that they're making.